Hello, everyone. I hope that you are all well. Just getting something off my screen, sorry. So today's going to be kind of different. I am going to go back to Being in Time, Heidegger, since that's what I'm currently reading. Actually, I am just starting chapter 4, so I finished chapter 3 last time, part 2. Last time we talked about I think just the whole of chapter 2. This time I did mark some quotes that I usually annotate quite a bit, but I did like double annotate some quotes this time that I thought were helpful. So chapter 3 is called The Authentic Potentiality for Being a Whole of Dasein, which is kind of a nice idea, right? That we are whole, that is a essential part or quality of being. And temporality, because being in time, the first part is being, the second part is time, as the ontological meaning of care. So what is the relationship? So Heidegger's understanding of care is kind of a proactive relating to the world. So we are beings, and I think he says that in this chapter, we are beings that are concerned for our own being. And that especially makes sense to myself with anxiety, because I feel like I'm always concerned with my own being. Is something going to go wrong? Am I, is something bad going to happen, etc. So that's pretty much being concerned with my own being. But care can also just be that we attend to ourselves to maintain and sustain ourselves. We use things that are around us in the world. We project ourselves into the future. We are constantly encountering and relating to other beings in the world as well. So care encompasses kind of our situatedness in the world, but also our action in the world. And so what that has to do with time, right now, off the top of my head, I can just think of, because Heidegger does talk a lot about death, how being towards death, thinking about death will allow us to have a more fulfilled life where we can reach our potential and we can understand for ourselves what is really important. And I kind of think of the idea that might be a little cliche. It's probably even in a country song, live like you're dying. Or I think of Nietzsche's purpose behind the eternal return, which is his idea that, I do a video on it, but I'll just explain it quickly here. I think it's in the Gay Science, book 4 maybe, where he says, imagine that a demon comes to you, I think it is, and says that you will have to live the exact every single moment of your life now, you will have to relive it for eternity. So whatever you've done in the past and whatever you're going to do in the future, all of those moments will be your only moments and you will relive them eternally. So Nietzsche says we can either say this is the biggest curse. I don't want to relive this life. If I have to be resurrected and come back, like let it be, again, there's something on my screen. Let it be something easier. Like I need an easier level, let me just rest for a bit. Or we can say, I guess maybe there's 3 responses. Or we can say, oh my goodness, I've had such a wonderful life. This is amazing. I love it. And maybe along the same lines, but maybe a little more neutrally, we can wake up and say, oh my goodness, all right, this is good on the one hand because I have power, maybe not over my past, but now that I know this information, I can make sure that I make every moment count. And is this what Heidegger's saying, about our being toward death, it being so important? I don't know, that's what I'm getting out of it. So I have to say that for chapter 3, I almost wasn't going to talk about it. And I probably will go back and talk about the rest of Being in Time and do it just kind of as a reread and figure it out, what I can say about it and remember about it. But I don't have a coherent understanding, like a whole thematic understanding of this chapter. So I'm going to see if I can come to that. I can come to it. We can come to it together. Open your texts. And if something comes to me, I don't know. This could be a video where we just watch me fail at understanding this to a higher degree at this moment in my life and time. So, but again, I'm in chapter 3, which is basically a part 2, which is sections 61 to, I think, 66. Yeah. All right, so the first quote that I underlined that I thought was important, and I kind of tagged maybe the first theme is potentiality, but I mean, he talks about potentiality through the whole thing, so I'm not sure if it's unique to this chapter. So it's at the bottom of my page. I'm using the Stambaugh tradition or translation. I think I'm going to get I don't know. I forget what his name is. Marquis or Marquis or something like that. I don't know. The Macquarie. I think that's it. The Macquarie translation. I think I might actually like that translation better. But I got this one, I'm not going to lie. I am taken by a cover, and I thought the cover on this was going to be so beautiful, but it's actually not. It's kind of blurred, and I don't know. Anyway, all right, so kind of the beginning of 61. What if resoluteness, so remember last time we talked about being resolute, knowing who you are, like the Oracle at Delphi tells us, and being steadfast, and this helps us be authentic because we can be honest. What if resoluteness, following its own meaning, were brought into its authenticity only when it no longer projects itself upon arbitrary possibilities? And this is interesting. I think that he wants us to move more toward intention, and he feels like our falling prey and being entangled in the they with a capital T. We just kind of choose what's already laid out, which is random and arbitrary. Why is it random and well, let's just use his word. Why is it arbitrary? Or whatever it's translated, whatever the German was, translated into arbitrary. Maybe because we live in we're thrown into a particular historical time, a particular culture, and that itself is somewhat random. If you think we could have been born anywhere in any religion, that's, one experimental thought, right? Thinking about relative truths. So maybe that's kind of arbitrary because it's not all our options. So it's just some of our options. And we didn't filter it. We were just thrown into these options. So he really wants to move us out of our taken for grantedness, our limited thinking, and our limited thinking and maybe feeling. I don't know. He doesn't much talk about moving beyond moods unless it's projecting ourselves into anxiety. That seems like we're thrown there. So anyway, so it's something about if we want to meet our fullest potential, our options need not be arbitrary. Okay, so I spoke a lot. I'm just going to go back and start that sentence again. What if resoluteness, following its own meaning, were brought into its authenticity only when it no longer projects itself upon arbitrary possibilities merely lying nearby, but rather upon the most extreme possibility that lies ahead of every factical potentiality of being of Dasein. And as such, so why the extreme? Because we want to know everything. To reach your fullest potential, you have to go to maybe the extreme. What's the limit? Because if there's something beyond the potentials that you see, then you could go further, right? But you can't go further than the extreme. And as such, more or less enters without distortion every potentiality of being of Dasein factically seized upon. So what more can we see? What are we not seeing? It's what I wrote in the margin. This always reminds me, I don't even know if I've mentioned this yet, but it always reminds me of C.S. Lewis, and a theological writer, and what he says about why God is God. God is God, C.S. Lewis says, because that being can see everything clearly. Mortals, human beings, we are kind of thrown into our chaos. Did C.S. Lewis read Heidegger? I don't know. To look up that chronology and history. But human beings see through a glass darkly. We kind of, it's why we're confused sometimes, and we're trying to figure out a difficult relationship or what we should do or how we should feel in a situation. We need like a clarification. We can't see it, but God is God because they can see it instantly. They instantly know everything that's going on. They can see it from all angles, etc. It's kind of like, this also then reminds me of Don Miguel Ruiz, who is a Mexican spiritualist. He wrote the Four Agreements. And he talks about how, if you want to live your best life, his solutions for us, right? Heidegger is just teaching us how to live our most authentic lives. Don Miguel Ruiz, being rooted in Toltec mythology and spirituality and traditions, says that, for instance, we are clouded, we see through a glass darkly when we take things personally. Because actually, in reality, seeing things clearly, wiping off the muck of the lens that we're looking through at a situation that we've had hurt feelings by or offended by or been made self-conscious. He says that, in reality, it's not about us, usually, or at least not about us in a correct way. So we might, one of the examples that I think that he gives is that you're walking down a hallway, maybe of your school, of your workplace, whatever. Someone that usually, one of your workmates, that's maybe friendly or a friend, at least you see every day, you're on good terms. You usually walk by them and smile and say, hey, whatever. But this morning that you're walking across the hall and you're approaching this workmate, they just kind of walk past you, mostly ignoring you. Or maybe they look at you and they're just, they give you what you interpret as a dirty look. So on the one hand, you're going to have to make an assumption if you don't talk to them and ask them what's up. But let's say that you interpret that makes you feel bad. You feel like what you ask is, what have I done wrong? Or do they not like me? Or what's going on? I mean, you might assume that it's all about them, but that's where Ruiz is giving advice to the people in the first camp that I just mentioned. They're saying, no, probably your coworker is having a bad day. Maybe your coworker was frustrated because they didn't hear the alarm and coffee spilt on them, and they, traffic was really horrible, and they're just really unhappy that morning. And so it has nothing to do with you. It shouldn't make you feel bad. If anything, feel concerned for them and then ask them what's wrong later. But not assuming that anything's wrong with you or between you, but it's just something that's totally with them. But if you want to help them out and talk to them, fine. So it's kind of the idea that, you shouldn't be so self-conscious when you're giving a presentation in front of a classroom, because the percentage of attention that is on you, instead of, people's attention just always being on themselves, is because everyone's always already self-conscious, is minimal. No one's gonna, care as much as you that you mispronounced a word, or that you got stuck, or whatever. Everyone has so much going on with their lives, they're going to worry about them. So, right. So I was like, why did I go off in that? Because of the word distortion, right? And as such, more or less enters without distortion every potentiality of being. So the enlightened, the authentic person, can do what Ruiz is saying and can be like the God that C.S. Lewis imagines and see things clearly without distortion. You can see beyond what everyone just non-thinkingly accepts. So that's one thing. I mean, how is that different from, what he has been saying? I guess because now he's already talked about resoluteness, and our resoluteness has something to do with this. So we should not be resolute about, we should think about what we want to be resolute about, I guess, would be the new thing in this chapter. So going on to the next, still in this section, but in the margins, there are numbers, which I guess, I can't remember what they refer to, pages in the German. But around 303, still in this section, but page 290 in this translation. Thus the development of anticipatory resoluteness, because this is a particular type of resoluteness, right? We should be resolute, but anticipating. And I really don't remember talking a lot about that, or I can't exactly remember what that meant. Maybe we'll figure it out. Okay, so thus the development of anticipatory resoluteness as an existentially possible authentic potentiality for being whole loses the character of an arbitrary construction. It becomes the interpretation that frees Dasein for its most extreme possibility of existence. Okay, to me that just says exactly what the former quote in the last paragraph said. All right, the next one I underlined ontologically, and I think I paused there because the existentially possible, I think it's the facticity side of our lives, because it has two L's. Remember, there's existential and existential. Existential relates to the ontological, relates to the deeper layers of our being, so we can then apply it to and help out our existential or ontic or factical everydayness. Okay, so ontologically, Dasein is in principle different from everything objectively present and real. So whatever is objectively present and real does not help us understand who we are at our core. So this seems like just kind of a repetitive reminding. And that's what I really felt. I don't know. Anyway, we'll just go on. So I guess we can ask ourselves then, just looking at my note in the margins, what is objectively present for us? And then what can we think about that's not objectively present? I think at some point he says that whatever the ontological understanding of our being is, so the Dasein, the being that's there, is just opposite of whatever is immediately before our eyes. Opposite in the sense that it derives from something that's ontological, but it kind of gets twisted on the way to expressing itself objectively. And so it's kind of two sides of the same coin. And again, this reminds me of C.S. Lewis, which I read so long ago when I was an undergrad. I remember reading the Screwtape Letters specifically in a Barnes & Noble, because back when I was going to undergrad in the 2000s, the early 2000s, Barnes & Noble was the place to be. I had not discovered hipster coffee shops, nor do I know if they existed where I was in Oklahoma City on the north side. So they might have. I was just probably not cool enough. Barnes & Noble was cool. Anyway, it reminds me of what C.S. Lewis says about, again, the direction that we should go, that sort of the vices of our world, of humanity, are just one side of a coin that needs to be flipped in order to be closer to the divine and to realize, I don't know, does C.S. Lewis think that we are divine? Maybe. Need to go back and read him, I guess. But so for instance, if we are, so I can't remember any of his examples exactly. I want to say that envy, if we're feeling envious, on the other side, what the deeper sort of center of goodness is for us, like when you're envious, what is it? You hate that someone else is succeeding more than you. You want to be like them. You want to beat them. They just seem to have everything and be exactly your ideal. The other side of that coin could be love, So, and that's how you could change your mindset, because it's so close together, the envy and love. So you could really just flip the coin over and realize, love the fact that there's this, sort of beautiful ideal representation of success and goodness and power, and think positively congratulatory, things about that person. So, imagine that. And if everyone you were ever envious of, if you would just be overfilled with love for them, that exists in the world and that can inspire you. And if that person didn't exist, you wouldn't know what's possible. Think of it like that. You can be inspired by knowing that that's a way that you can work toward in your own unique version of what it is, right? So I think that's maybe that's what I think of when I think of Heidegger saying that, this very condemning sort of statement. Ontologically, Dasein is in principle different from everything objectively present and real. That's what I'm thinking. C.S. Lewis is gentler, I guess. All right, maybe sometimes. All right, the next one soon after, in the same sort of area-ish, the phenomenon of the self included in care needs a primordial and authentic existential definition. So he's going to be, I think, in this chapter, talking about selfhood, and that we don't automatically get a self. So it's kind of like Simone de Beauvoir and The Second Sex. No one is a woman. We become women. A woman is something that you become, which I guess leads to Judith Butler's gender is performativity. Maybe. So the self, in order to really understand the self, and he gets into the superficial sort of inauthentic selfhood, how that gets represented. And that gets represented in our articulation of the I. So when I say I am this, or I think, or I believe, he says that people who are not sort of in tune with their authentic selves oversay I. And we might say that this is narcissistic. If you look at someone's writing, and I think I'm at fault with this, probably. There are more creative ways to say things. We don't want to start every sentence, like let's say in an essay, we really wouldn't. Let's say, I let my students use first person in their essays because I like confessional first person kind of writing. But still, even if you use first person, you want more variety in your sentences than always starting everything with I. And also, you never need to say I think or I believe in an essay because it's yours. Like, we know that everything that you're saying you think, unless you say on the contrary, or some people say, or others might think, so otherwise, you never need to say I think or I believe. But you definitely, as you're using I throughout your first person essay, you don't want to always use I. But Heidegger sees that as a signal that we don't understand the self. Maybe that we're not confident in the self. I don't know. So he mentions the self here, and he mentions that we need to talk about the self in an existential way. So the next quote is in, I'm going to talk about the columns, 304, but page 291 on mine. If the ontological character of its own being is remote from Dasein because of the dominance of its entangled understanding of being, so ... I just underline part of that just to remind myself that the reason that we're on the wrong side of C.S. Lewis's coin is because we are entangled, because we are dominated by our entangled understanding of being, entangled in the they. And so he mentions a lot, he uses the phrase the vulgar understanding because he wants to put that on the shelf. Kind of like I said in the last video, I think he wants to shelve what seems obvious in order to get to a different kind of deeper understanding, to see what else is there. And so he calls the common understanding of things like time. He wants to redefine. He wants to redefine self. He wants to redefine time. His whole book is he wants to redefine being. But there's some truth in the vulgar representation. Or if there's not truth in it, we can understand, we can make a connection between what Heidegger is striving to find out and what is manifest in our objective present reality. So this is then the other line that I underlined, the reason for the dominance of the vulgar understanding of time. So yeah, so that's what I got so far. Moving on to section 62. He starts talking, he introduces a question about death. It's titled, the section 62 is titled the existentially, so not existentially, existential, the ontic, authentic potentiality for being whole of Dasein as anticipatory resoluteness. So I guess maybe the section is more about our everydayness, how we can improve it, something like that. I wish it were that general. Then it would be a self-help book. And yeah. Okay, so I didn't really underline it because I didn't necessarily get his point about, like, if he was saying anything new about death that wasn't what I already mentioned in the beginning. But what he asks is the first sentence, the first question of section 62. To what extent does resoluteness, thought out to its end? So again, we should be reflective about our resoluteness before we just jump into being resolute. Think about what you value and prioritize before you put a stamp down on it. And Nietzsche would say, actually, you could, I guess, think about it, but Nietzsche says that his habits always evolve, that he doesn't mind a habit, that you need to have habits. He likes habits, but don't expect his habits not to change. But I think Heidegger wants a more prolonged habitual self, maybe. Okay, so to what extent does resoluteness, thought out to its end in accordance with its own most tendency of being, lead us to authentic being toward death? That's his question. And my answer would be, I don't know. Here's one that I didn't expect to point out, but I underlined a phrase. This is on page 293. We conceived of death existentially, so not with an E, with an A, as what we, so they both have two L's, as what we characterize as the possibility of the impossibility of existence, that is, the absolute nothingness of Dasein. Death is not tacked on to Dasein as its end, but as care. Dasein is the throne that is null, ground of its death. And then he goes on to say, care contains death and guilt equiprimortally, but hold on. So I just try to reduce this to ideas that I can get and apply to my life. But let me know in the comments if you are reading the section or you have read it and you can put me, right, put me straight. I think it's, again, this is just going to be my simplistic interpretation. We conceived of death existentially as what we characterize as the possibility of the impossibility of existence. So death is something that we should think about constantly. And maybe concerning this impossibility of existence, I think that if we even go to Schopenhauer and a pessimistic worldview, that our everyday assumption might be demanding or asking life, why isn't it better? Why isn't life, we just take life as it is, that life, that existence exists, we take that for granted. I think in our everyday thrownness of the entangled in the they. And so we take it for granted. So then that leads us to the question, asking, why isn't life better than it is? Why are our bodies so sensitive to pain? And I think one thing that Schopenhauer says, I might have watched this in a video lecture that I watched recently, that Schopenhauer is displeased because, I think it was him, sounds like him, because our ability to experience pleasure is finite, but our ability to experience pain is infinite. That we are so much more, so for instance, when your body feels good, when you're well, when you're healthy, you don't think about anything, right? You're not focused on your any part of your body because everything's just, smooth and wonderful, but it's kind of neutral. You're not jumping for joy usually that you're healthy. But when something is amiss, when something goes wrong, I don't know, I'm just going to mention this because this is what I'm dealing with now. Your gums are sensitive because you had too much cold pressed juice and been brushing your teeth too hard or something. I don't know. It's time to go to the dentist, I guess. But, then it's like, oh, this afflicts you. and you're worried about it, and how do I fix it, and like, can it be fixed, and it's interrupting my enjoyment of life and my focus and all these things, where suddenly it's like before us, right? And so we get to, but anyway, the dissatisfaction is the problem, right? And Heidegger is not, he's not being a pessimist, I don't think. He's not really, upset about life. He's really focused on our misperceptions. And so we go too far. Heidegger was to pull us back and say, well, how do we even, like, we should be in awe, maybe I'm completely off base, but when I look at impossibility of existence, perhaps we should be in awe that this is even here, that it's so wonderful thinking constantly. It's so wonderful that we're allowed to enjoy the pleasure of seeing, if we are. Enjoy whatever pleasures that we have, and we're all different, right? We're all in different situations. But I recently heard, I think on a meditation track, or I don't know, somewhere, that just the reminder that even on your worst day, no matter who you are and whatever your position is in life, whatever your situation, whatever chronic illness you're dealing with, whatever, just happened to you that's not great, etc. On your worst day, there's still going to be someone that wishes that they were you on your worst day, because that's better than where they are, so it's all relative. I don't know how far you want to carry that, but I think it's just bringing us back to a different kind of mindset is what maybe, we can get from this, from the impossibility of existence. It's just what I get. Okay, so going forward, page 294, still in the same section, but the margin says 308, so 308 in German. That's just what I'm going to say, because I think that's what it is. Kind of close to that. The next quote that I wrote down in chapter 3, but this means that it simply cannot become rigid about the situation. Okay, so going back, the question is, what then does the certainty belonging to, see in this, I don't know why I didn't, I'm going to underline that for myself, for the future, because you don't understand that quote until you read this sentence that kind of comes before it. Okay, so what then, and this is in italics, so it's super important, I guess. What then does the certainty belonging to such resoluteness mean? So once we get past all the arbitrary options, and we focus on the extreme, and we know what comes before that, and then we decide we're resolute, we're certain about it, what does it mean? Well, but this means that it simply cannot become, okay, so I skipped a sentence too. I should read that as well. Let's just read it all. What then does the certainty belonging to such resoluteness mean? The certainty must hold itself in what is disclosed, and disclosed means coming to light, being, revealed. What is disclosed in resolution. But this means that it simply cannot become rigid about the situation, but must understand that the resolution must be kept free. So this is a little caveat about the resolution, lest we take it to our own extreme. Must be kept free and open for the actual factical possibility in accordance with its own meaning as a disclosure. The certainty of the resolution means keeping oneself free for the possibility of taking it back, a possibility that is always factically necessary. This holding for true in resoluteness as the truth of existence, however, by no means lets us fall back into resoluteness. So I think this is kind of a nice sentiment that he's bringing up, because it's kind of like the appropriate response to advice, any advice that anyone gives you, advice that you read, advice that you hear from your professor, advice that you, whatever, encounter. You kind of take what serves you at that moment. Best practices are take what serves you and then, shelve the rest. Maybe you'll need it later. Maybe it'll work for you later. Maybe it never will. But the point of advice is to be helpful, right? So what is not helpful is to, become sort of rigid and dogmatic and, rigid is the best word, I think, to the extent that the advice actually hurts you, because it doesn't serve you. You have to be able to be wise enough. We all have to be able to be wise enough to discriminate and to give ourselves the grace and the authority to, or the agency, authority might be a triggering word, right? To the agency to decide and to know ourselves and to know what's helpful and to be okay with doing that. It's not all or nothing. Find what works for you. And so I think that Heidegger he doesn't want us to misinterpret resoluteness, but he wants to give a little space for it so that we can always be authentic. Because are we really being authentic if we are making, we never want to make something into an idol, right? So, at some point for some people, it might have been nice to look at the Christian God as Father, right? So, thinking about, and everyone might be different, but one potential ideal idea of a father is a parental guiding figure who is, and then, steeped in tradition, right? And probably heteronormative understandings, but let's just describe it without prescribing. Kind of someone who's wise, someone who can guide you, who can be firm when they need to, and who can be also, nurturing, who's going to be there, who's going to be vocal, who's going to, whatever, and then that's one example. But whatever maybe people thought about fathers whenever that idea or that metaphor got attached to the Christian God. Supposedly, I'm assuming it was a good thing, and that's why they want to call God Father. So that's fine, and that's great. But feminist theologians have critiqued that metaphor, saying that, just looking at the time, saying that it's become an idol. It's become frozen to the point where saying God the Mother is sacrilegious and blasphemous, and it brings up, it triggers some people in the church. You can't say God the Mother. God isn't a goddess. God isn't female or a woman. That's pagan. That's, whatever it is. But why? Because then feminist theologians will go through the, Hebrew scriptures and the Greek scriptures and say, but there are all of these beautiful feminine metaphors for God as well. So what about that? What about Sophia? What about, the mother bear who protects her cubs? That refers to God. Or, there's various female, feminine metaphors. So it's not that it's outside of the realm of what even the Bible says. So we can't idolize and reify a value or a priority or a duty for eternity without applying wisdom and discrimination and being open to, as Heidegger says, taking it back. That's his idea of how to be an authentic person, is to never stop reevaluating and reflecting, even in your resoluteness and steadfastness. But yet it doesn't mean, he says also, that we go into irresoluteness. Like he doesn't want us to say, well, everything's probably doesn't want us to fall into ethical relativism and say that, well, okay, what I have thought about no longer serves me or no longer makes sense or doesn't make sense in the situation. So, I mean, well, nothing matters then. Like I just think whatever I want. So he's saying that that's not it either. Stay open, but then don't fall into nihilism where nothing means anything. That's one definition of nihilism. Because that is not, we can't lose hope like that. That's not what he's suggesting is authentic. He wants us to stand for something. So, okay. So that's kind of, a nice little piece of sentimental advice. All right. So the next one, very close after that I underlined, and we have, yes, Anchor is telling me that I only have 15 minutes left. We'll see. We may not get through this whole chapter. Well, we will on YouTube. So if you were listening to my podcast, it'll be in part 2. So, all right, we'll have to take an intermission. All right, and it's also 6:39 where I am. We have time. I feel calm. Okay. All right. The holding for true that belongs to resoluteness tends in accordance with its meaning toward constantly keeping oneself free. Sounds fine. That is, to keep itself free for the whole potentiality of being of Dasein. Because even if we say, okay, we've read Heidegger, we understand, we're going to start exploring the potentiality, maybe it's a lifelong goal, So maybe we come upon something certain about ourselves at this point, but we should still keep perhaps learning. Because we are never not a potentiality, right? That's his potentiality of being. Okay, of Dasein. So then it says, which again I didn't double highlight, but is jumping out to me now, in its death. Okay, I'll just read that. I won't skip a sentence. This constant certainty is guaranteed to resoluteness only in such a way that it relates to the possibility of which it can be absolutely certain. And B is emphasized and italicized. This constant certainty, this is why I didn't underline the sentence, because I didn't understand it. Okay, so this constant certainty is guaranteed to resoluteness only in such a way. So what is the certainty? The holding for true, just we're certain that we should keep ourselves open. Maybe this constant certainty is guaranteed to resoluteness only in such a way that it relates to the possibility of which it can be absolutely certain. Yeah, I don't know. In its death, Dasein must absolutely take itself back. So in its death, Dasein must absolutely take itself back. So we're resolute about something, but in its death, Dasein must absolutely take itself back. And take itself back is in quotations. I don't know. You tell me. But Dasein, so what could it mean though? I don't know. I think that in its death, I mean, if we're still talking metaphorically here, then thinking in terms of death and rebirth, really to go through that process. So looking at death existentially and not existentially. So not factically, but maybe a deeper, more abstract understanding of death, which I don't know if that's where he's going here. So you might be screaming at me in the video saying, that's not what he means. Tell me in a comment. But if he does mean it existentially, that's the only way I can understand this at this point, is that in its death, Dasein must absolutely take itself back, that there is a transformation that happens, and we take back the values of our former self after our rebirth and transform and change. Sounds like an easy interpretation to me, but that's all I can say about it. Okay, so this is kind of interesting, even though I didn't double underline it. But Dasein is equiprimordially in truth. So when it says equiprimordially, it means that it's before, it's so connected with us, it's before we even think about it or decide about it, and it happens at the same time. So Dasein being equiprimordially in untruth is just meaning that we are both in truth and untruth in our essence. Just like we are never not thrown or fallen prey, except I think infrequently. There is a quote that makes me think this, but infrequently we are not thrown. We are returned to ourselves from our lostness. Okay, so, I think I'm going to pause right there. I will come back. You will not notice. It'll look like an edit, but I'm going to pause the Zoom so that I can finish my, well, if you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to end here and pick it up in part 2. But I will be right back for this video.